Most brides end their wedding night with champagne. Mine ended with a grease-stained bar rag smacking me in the face. My new husband pointed at the dirty kitchen sink. "Time to earn your keep," he said coldly. I did not cry or argue. I just smiled and gave a single nod. He thought that nod meant submission. He had no idea it was the exact moment I began planning his family's utter destruction. My name is Piper Davis. I am 31 years old, and for exactly 4 hours. I had been Piper Mercer. The reception at Cedar Ridge Hall was finally winding down. The string quartet had packed up their instruments, and the last of the drunk, laughing guests had stumbled out into the cool air of the Kentucky suburbs. Cedar Ridge Hall was a sprawling, rustic chic event venue owned by my new in-laws, the Mercer family. Throughout the entire day, everything had felt flawlessly orchestrated. The toasts were perfectly timed. The smiles from my mother-in-law, Denise, were bright and camera-ready. The affectionate touches from my husband, Grant, were exactly what a blushing bride could ever want. Looking back, I should have realized that the perfection was heavy. It was a performance. My feet throbbed inside my satin heels. The beaded bodice of my wedding gown felt like a suit of armor pressing against my ribs. I wanted nothing more than to retreat to the bridal suite upstairs, peel off the layers of tulle, and finally breathe. I thought the night would end with a quiet moment, maybe a glass of leftover champagne, and the exhausted, happy whispers of newlyweds. I was wrong. Before I could even reach the staircase, a sharp voice cut through the empty, cavernous dining room. "Piper, in here." It was Denise. Her tone was completely stripped of the warm, syrupy cadence she had used all evening while greeting the local socialites. It was the voice of a supervisor calling a subordinate. I turned and walked toward the swinging metal doors that led to the industrial catering kitchen in the back. The transition from the romantic, fairy light-draped ballroom to the harsh, fluorescent glare of the kitchen was jarring. The air back here smelled of stale beer, scorched meat, and heavy bleach. Denise stood by the massive stainless steel prep tables. She had kicked off her heels, but her posture was rigid. My father-in-law, Walter, stood slightly behind her, leaning against a turned-off commercial oven, silent and observing. "Women in this family do not stand around watching others clean," Denise said. She did not look at me as a daughter. She looked at me as an asset that was currently sitting idle. Before I could process the sheer hostility of her statement, the back door of the kitchen swung open. Grant walked in. He was still wearing his tailored wedding shirt, but the bow tie was gone, and his sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. The charming, teary-eyed groom who had promised to cherish me forever just 2 hours ago had vanished entirely. In his place stood a man who looked like an irritated shift manager. He walked straight toward me. He did not say a word. He reached into a plastic bus tub filled with dirty dishes, pulled out a wet, heavy bar rag soaked in cocktail sauce and frying grease, and threw it directly at my face. The wet cloth struck my shoulder with a heavy smack and slid up against my cheek before falling to the tiled floor. A cold shock rippled through my chest. The smell of rancid oil and sour sauce clung to my skin. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the expensive lace of my skirt. I looked at the man I had just married. His jaw was set. His eyes held absolutely no warmth, no apology, not even a flicker of hesitation. "Time to earn your keep," Grant said coldly. His voice echoed off the steel walls. "Starting tomorrow, you are in charge of the house. You will be up by 5 in the morning to prepare breakfast for everyone. You handle the laundry. You handle the groceries. And on weekends, you do not sit around. You come down here to the hall. You help flip the rooms. You restock the inventory, and you process the vendor paperwork." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, pointing a finger toward the floor where the dirty rag lay. "You live under our roof now. You eat our food. You will pull your weight." He finished. Denise took a step forward, crossing her arms over her expensive silk dress. We do not raise or harbor useless people in the Mercer family. You had a beautiful room to get ready in today. You had a lavish wedding that cost tens of thousands of dollars. You now have our name. It is time you show some gratitude and repay this family for what we have given you." Walter remained silent. He just adjusted his watch and looked away, fully complicit in the ambush. The air in the kitchen grew incredibly thin. The walls seemed to press inward. Any other woman might have shattered right there. A normal bride would have burst into tears, screamed, demanded an explanation, or begged to know where the man she loved had gone. I am not a normal bride. I am 31 years old. I have built a solid, independent career, and I possess a mind that categorizes threats the moment they appear. The shock only lasted a fraction of a second. The grief would have to wait. Right now, survival instincts took over. If I cried, I would give them power. If I argued, I would show them my cards. They wanted to break me. They wanted to establish dominance on night one, so I would spend the rest of my life scrambling for their approval. I looked at the greasy stain on my shoulder. I looked at Grant. I looked at Denise. Then, I let the corners of my mouth lift into a very soft, quiet smile. I gave them one single, definitive nod. I did not speak a single word. The tension in the room instantly deflated. Grant let out a short, arrogant breath from his nose, his shoulders dropping. Denise offered a smug, tight-lipped smirk. They exchanged a look of triumph. They actually thought I had surrendered. They thought they had successfully snapped my spine and slipped the collar around my neck with zero resistance. "Good," Denise said briskly. "Grab some paper towels and wipe your face. Then start on the glassware." I turned away from them, walking slowly toward the hand-washing sink near the small manager's office. My heart was beating with a slow, terrifying rhythm. I reached for the paper towel dispenser, and as I did, my eyes darted into the dimly lit office. The door was propped open with a heavy box. On the center of the cluttered wooden desk, illuminated by a single desk lamp, sat a thick manila folder. The bold black letters on the white label seemed to jump out of the shadows. G. Mercer/P. Davis Mercer Refinance Packet. My maiden name, my married name, refinance. I stopped breathing for 2 whole seconds. Grant had never mentioned refinancing. He had told me his family's event hall was highly profitable, a legacy business that was printing money. Why would there be a massive stack of bank documents requiring my signature as a co-applicant? Why would my name be slapped onto their debt just hours after I said my vows? I dabbed the grease off my cheek, straining my ears. Grant had walked out the back delivery door to the loading dock. I heard the unmistakable flick of a lighter, followed by the deep voice of his cousin, Ryan, who handled the bar inventory. "A bit harsh for the wedding night. Man." Ryan chuckled through a cloud of smoke. Grant laughed. It was a cruel metallic sound. "She is compliant. Besides, marrying a wife with a brain is significantly cheaper than hiring another operations manager and a certified accountant. We need her credit score and her organizational skills. Once her name is on the loan, she is locked in. She will do what she is told." The final pillar of my romantic delusion crumbled into dust. The wedding was not a celebration of love. The courtship had not been a pursuit of my heart. It had been an extended job interview. I was targeted. They saw an independent woman with excellent credit, professional management skills, and a calm demeanor, and they decided I was the perfect unpaid asset to bail out their sinking ship. I threw the paper towel into the trash can. I did not go to the sink to wash the glassware. I turned around and walked straight out of the kitchen. I moved silently through the dark. Empty ballroom, ascending the grand staircase toward the bridal changing room. The heavy silk of my dress dragged across the carpet. Every step I took was a quiet drumbeat of war. Grant Mercer thought my silent smile was a sign of absolute submission. He was entirely wrong. It was the exact moment I saw the teeth of the steel trap they had laid for me. This was not the beginning of a marriage. This was a hostile induction into a labor camp. I closed the door of the bridal suite and locked it. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, looking at the grease stain ruining the white lace. I was entirely alone in the building with a family of predators. But as I stared at my reflection, I felt no fear. I only felt a cold, calculating clarity. They thought they had trapped a maid to clean their messes and a financial shield to hide their failures. They had no idea who they had just married. Inside, the silence was immediate and absolute. I did not collapse against the wood. I did not slide to the floor in a puddle of tears and tulle. Instead, I walked straight to the vanity mirror and reached around to the middle of my back. The zipper of the designer gown was stubborn, but I pulled it down with a sharp, singular motion. The heavy silk and lace dropped to the floor. Pooling around my ankles like a discarded costume, I stepped out of it without looking down. I opened my overnight bag and pulled out a pair of worn denim jeans, a thin cashmere sweater, and my athletic sneakers. The transformation took less than 3 minutes. I was no longer a blushing bride waiting for her groom. I was a woman preparing to evacuate a combat zone. Next came the money. I unzipped the side compartment of my leather tote bag, where my maid of honor had safely stored the wedding envelopes. I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa and began sorting them with rapid, mechanical precision. I separated the cards from my extended family, stacking the cash gifts neatly. Then, I found the thick, heavy envelope from my parents. Before the ceremony, my father had pressed it into my hands, telling me it was a safety net for my new life. It contained exactly $10,000 in certified funds. I tucked it securely into my inner jacket pocket. Finally, I picked up the extravagant, oversized envelope Denise and Walter had handed to Grant and me during the reception speeches. They had made a grand show of it, ensuring the photographer captured the moment they handed over a check for $50,000. I pulled the check free from the gold foil card. Under the harsh light of the vanity bulbs, I read the black ink carefully. The name printed in the top left corner did not say Walter and Denise Mercer. It said Cedar Ridge Hall, LLC. It was drawn directly from their corporate operating account, not a personal savings fund. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My background in project management involved enough accounting to know that writing a massive personal gift from a struggling corporate entity was a massive red flag. It was either tax fraud or a completely bounced check meant only for show. My intuition screamed that it was the latter. The realization propelled me back to the door. I cracked it open. The hallway was entirely deserted. The faint sounds of Grant and his cousin laughing echoed from the distant loading dock outside. I slipped out of the suite, my rubber-soled sneakers making absolutely no sound on the hardwood floors, and navigated back down the service stairs to the small manager's office off the main kitchen. The manila folder was still sitting on the desk under the glow of the single brass lamp. I pulled out my phone, double-checked that the flash was turned off, and opened the folder. The first page was a master loan application. Right beneath Grant's signature line was a highlighted box with my full married name already typed in. The designation next to it read, Household Co-Applicant. I took a clear, focused photograph of the page. I flipped to the next section. It was a staggering ledger of overdue accounts. They owed $22,000 to the regional floral distributor, $14,000 to the premier catering supplier, and nearly $8,000 in unpaid property taxes. The total debt was astronomical. They were weeks away from foreclosure. I photographed every single page of the ledger. They did not just want a free maid. They desperately needed my pristine credit score to secure a commercial refinance loan they could never qualify for on their own. I turned my attention to the large corkboard hanging on the wall above the desk. Pinned to the center was a printed schedule for the upcoming month. My name was highlighted in bright yellow ink across multiple days. For Saturday, the box read, Piper Mercer, Inventory and Vendor Negotiations, starting at 6 in the morning. For Sunday, it dictated, Piper Mercer, Linen Count and Deep Clean, ending at midnight. They had mapped out my entire existence. allocating 80 hours a week of unpaid labor to my name without ever asking me a single question. I took 3 photographs of the board, making sure the dates and the handwriting were perfectly legible. I slipped out of the office and hurried back up to the bridal suite. I had everything I needed. White. I picked up my purse and my overnight bag. I stopped in front of the vanity mirror one last time. I looked at my left hand. The 2-carat diamond engagement ring and the matching wedding band felt heavy and foreign against my skin. I slid them off my finger. I placed them exactly in the center of the glass table. I draped my delicate, custom-embroidered tulle veil over the velvet chair. I did not leave them there as a dramatic, sorrowful gesture of a heartbroken woman. I left them perfectly arranged as a cold, silent notification. The obedient, easily manipulated character they had written for me had officially resigned from the production. It was nearly midnight when I walked out the side exit of Cedar Ridge Hall. The damp Kentucky air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and impending rain. I did not run. Running implied fear, and I was not afraid. I walked with a steady, calculated pace across the dark, gravel parking lot toward the main road. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I trusted implicitly. The line rang twice before she answered. "Tessa," I said, my voice completely steady. "Get your car. Drive to the 24-hour gas station on Maple Avenue. Do not ask me any questions right now. Just come." I hung up before she could formulate a response. I knew she would be there. Tessa Vaughn was fiercely loyal and incredibly fast. I reached the edge of the property and stood beneath the flickering neon sign of the gas station. My phone vibrated in the palm of my hand. The screen lit up with a text message from Grant. "Where the hell did you go?" I watched the screen as 3 more messages populated in rapid succession. "Get back to the kitchen right now. You are embarrassing my mother and disrespecting this family. Do not test me on our wedding night, Piper. Get back here before I make you regret it." He was still playing the role of the angry, dominant patriarch. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that his empire was already burning. I took a screenshot of every single message, capturing the exact timestamps and the violent, demanding tone. Once the images were safely saved to my secure cloud drive, I went into my settings and blocked his number completely. I blocked Denise. I blocked Walter. I blocked his cousin. I severed the communication lines with clinical precision. 5 minutes later, the familiar headlights of Tessa's sedan swept across the dark pavement. She slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching slightly before she unlocked the passenger door. I opened the door, threw my bag into the back seat, and slid into the warmth of the car. I pulled the seatbelt across my chest and clicked it into place. Before Tessa could even open her mouth to ask what had happened to my wedding dress, I held up one finger to ask for a moment of silence. I opened the banking application on my phone. I navigated directly to the security dashboard. With 3 swift taps on the glass screen, I initiated a total and immediate freeze on my social security number and my personal credit file. The confirmation screen flashed green. The lock was secured. As Tessa pulled the car back onto the highway, speeding away from the venue, I leaned my head against the cold window. I looked out into the darkness. For the first time that night, the absolute reality of the situation settled into my bones. I was not just a runaway bride fleeing a bad argument. I was a woman who had just seen the jaws of a steel trap snapping shut, and I had successfully pulled my leg out a fraction of a second before it crushed the bone. I had cut the fuse on their explosive plan. Now, it was time to build one of my own. Tessa lived in a converted industrial building right in the center of downtown. The moment she locked her front door behind us, she pointed me directly toward the guest bathroom and handed me a stack of thick cotton towels. The water in her shower ran scalding hot. I stood under the heavy spray for nearly 45 minutes. I used a harsh exfoliating scrub on my arms, my shoulders, and my neck, desperate to eradicate the invisible residue of that kitchen. I wanted to wash away the lingering stench of fryer grease, but more importantly, I wanted to scrub off the feeling of being treated like a piece of owned property. By the time I finally stepped out and put on the oversized pajamas Tessa offered, I felt physically clean. Mentally, however, my brain was running at 1,000 miles an hour. Tessa made up the guest bed with heavy blankets, but sleep was completely out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, the stark white label of the refinance folder flashed vividly in the dark. My name, shackled to theirs. At exactly 7 in the morning, I sat on Tessa's velvet sofa, holding a mug of black coffee, and dialed my parents. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright and expectant, likely waiting to hear about my first morning as a married woman. I did not sugarcoat anything. I took a steady breath and laid out the entire sequence of events. I braced myself for the typical generational advice. I expected to hear suggestions that perhaps I had misunderstood the situation, or that the first year of marriage always requires a period of difficult adjustment. I received absolutely none of that. My mother went dead silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling with a fierce, quiet rage. "Where are you right now?" she demanded. "Are you safe?" My father took the phone from her before I could fully answer. "You have your old key," he said, his tone thick with an unwavering, protective resolve. "Your bedroom is exactly how you left it. You come home whenever you want. Do not let those people make you feel small. Piper, we are behind you. Completely. No one is going to force you to go back to that house." The sheer relief of their unconditional support anchored my racing heart. Then, I had to speak to my older brother. Owen is a commercial contractor, a man with broad shoulders and a dangerously short temper when it comes to his family. When I relayed the kitchen commands to him, he let out a low, terrifying string of curses. "I am getting my truck," Owen growled into the receiver. "I am going to drive over to that venue and rearrange his jaw." "Owen, absolutely not," I told him, keeping my voice hard and commanding. "If you lay a single finger on him, you give them leverage. You make them the victims. I need you to be smart right now, not angry." He hated the logic, but he listened to me, instead of driving off to start a physical brawl. Owen channeled his fury into something incredibly practical. Within 3 hours, he arrived at our parents' suburban house with a truckload of hardware. He replaced every single exterior deadbolt with high-security locks. He spent the entire afternoon wiring high-definition doorbell cameras at the front entrance, the back patio, and the driveway. He then pulled a lawn chair onto the front porch, sat down with a notepad, and spent the rest of the day logging the license plate number of every unfamiliar vehicle that drove past the property. Meanwhile, Tessa was taking action of her own. By 11 o'clock, she slid a sleek business card across her kitchen island. "Her name is Vivian Hart," Tessa said confidently. "She is a premier divorce attorney. She handled my older sister's separation last year. Vivian is quick, she is ruthless, and she has an absolute hatred for men who treat marriage contracts like ownership documents." An hour later, I was sitting inside a pristine, glass-walled office overlooking the city. Vivian Hart sat across from me. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and possessed sharp, analytical eyes that seemed to process information at lightning speed. I placed my phone on her massive desk and opened the secure photo gallery. I let her scroll through the images of the schedules, the loan applications, and the aggressive text messages. Vivian did not gasp in shock. She did not offer me soft, empty sympathies. She simply tapped a manicured fingernail against the screen and leaned back in her leather chair. "This is not a sudden outburst of temper from a stressed groom," Vivian stated smoothly. "This is a meticulously drafted business acquisition. They plan to absorb you completely. The strategy was simple. They force you into the marital home to assert dominance immediately. They trap you in an unpaid labor schedule under the guise of contributing. Then, they use the sacred, untouchable concept of family duty to legalize your financial exploitation." She handed the phone back to me. "We need to verify the extent of the financial rot. Go to your bank. Check on that grand wedding gift they handed you." I followed her instructions immediately. I drove to my local bank branch and sat down with a manager I had known for 5 years. I handed her the extravagant corporate check. She typed the routing and account numbers into her secure terminal. Her polite smile vanished instantly. "Piper, I cannot process a single cent of this," she whispered, leaning closer across the desk. This corporate account is currently under a hard restriction for consecutive financial defaults. They cannot issue funds. This piece of paper is entirely worthless." It was the exact confirmation I needed. The grand public gesture they made in front of all our wedding guests was a theatrical prop designed to buy social credit they could not afford. Sitting in my car in the bank parking lot, I pulled up my secure credit monitoring application. I refreshed the dashboard. A new glaring alert sat at the very top of the screen. A regional commercial lending institution had initiated a soft credit inquiry on my profile at precisely 8 o'clock the previous night. That was exactly 2 hours after the ceremony concluded, while I was dancing with my father and cutting the cake. They were already running my numbers to see if I could carry the weight of their failing empire. I drove back to the law firm and laid the new findings on Vivian's desk. She nodded, clearly satisfied that we were building an airtight perimeter. "From this exact moment forward, you maintain absolute strategic silence," Vivian instructed, sliding a freshly printed retainer agreement toward me. "You do not answer his phone calls. You do not agree to meet him in private to talk things out. You save every text message, every hostile voicemail, and every email. And above all else, you absolutely do not sign a single piece of paper they put in front of you. If they reach out claiming they have documents to divide the wedding gifts, you refuse. If they say it is just a routine procedure to change your residential address, you ignore it entirely." I picked up the heavy black pen and signed my name on the dotted line. By the time I returned to Tessa's apartment, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the hardwood floors. I poured myself a glass of cold water and stood by the large window, looking out at the city skyline. A profound, irreversible shift had occurred within my chest over the last 24 hours. I no longer viewed Grant as the handsome man who had simply insulted me in a moment of cruel arrogance. I no longer looked at him as a disappointing husband. As the final pieces of the puzzle locked into place, I saw him with crystal clarity. I saw a man who had stepped into a marriage with a detailed, calculated list of benefits he intended to harvest. He wanted my organizational skills to run his business. He wanted my clean financial history to secure his loans. He wanted my physical labor to scrub his floors. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. He thought he had found the perfect, compliant resource to drain dry. He was about to find out exactly what happens when the resource decides to fight back. I needed a fortress, not just a place to sleep. Within 48 hours of leaving Tessa's guest room, I signed a 6-month lease on a high-rise apartment on the west side of the city. I chose the building specifically for its aggressive security protocols. It had a heavy iron-gated entrance, a 24-hour lobby guard desk, and high-definition surveillance cameras covering every single hallway, elevator bank, and stairwell. I did not rent this specific unit for mere peace of mind. I rented it because physical safety was the foundational layer of my offensive strategy. I knew how families like the Mercers operated. I knew that once Grant and his mother realized their financial lifeline was truly severed, they would eventually escalate from digital harassment to physical intimidation. I needed a perimeter they could not breach. Instead of hiding under the covers and waiting for the scandalous gossip to settle, I opened my laptop and completely overhauled my professional portfolio. I reached out to a former associate named Celia Rowe, who was a senior director at Harbor and Slate Studio, a highly respected creative agency downtown. Celia and I had collaborated on a massive corporate branding retreat 2 years prior. At the time, she had explicitly praised my ability to wrangle difficult, uncooperative vendors and my talent for managing complex project timelines under extreme pressure. I sent Celia a brief, professional email stating I was available for new opportunities. My phone rang exactly 4 hours later, after a single rigorous interview over coffee. I secured a lucrative contract position with a direct pathway to a permanent, salaried role. The compensation package was generous, meaning I could easily support myself and cover my new rent without ever touching the $10,000 my parents had given me as a safety net. Earning that position was the first deep breath I had taken since the wedding. I was completely self-sufficient, standing firmly on my own 2 feet. My inner circle moved around me like a synchronized protective unit. Tessa spent an entire Saturday walking through apartment showings with me, rigorously inspecting window locks and interrogating the property managers about their guest access policies. My brother, Owen, took time off from his contracting business to personally drive me to and from my new office during those first few precarious days. His eyes were constantly scanning the rearview mirror for any vehicles following us, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a quiet, protective intensity. My parents became an impenetrable rear guard. They did not wring their hands in despair. They did not weep over the lost wedding deposits or suggest I try marital counseling to smooth things over. They treated the situation with a cold, rational pragmatism that kept me grounded. Whenever I stopped by their house for dinner, my father would pour me a glass of iced tea, look me directly in the eye, and deliver the same steady reminder. "Do not let them scare you into silence," he would say. "They thrive on the assumption that you will be too embarrassed to fight back. Prove them wrong." They gave me the absolute freedom to be ruthless. On a rainy Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The sender identified herself as Mallory Quinn, a sharp-witted former bartender who had worked at Cedar Ridge Hall for nearly 3 years before quitting in utter disgust. Mallory wrote that she had heard the wild rumors circulating about the wedding night blowout and felt compelled to share something I desperately needed to know. According to Mallory, Denise had been gloating in the employee break room for over a month before the ceremony. Denise had proudly announced to the remaining staff that her new daughter-in-law had a brilliant head for paperwork, and from now on, the family would not have to waste another dime outsourcing the bookkeeping or the event coordination. Mallory did not just provide hearsay, she provided concrete, irrefutable proof. She attached a high-resolution photograph of the employee scheduling board taken exactly 6 weeks before my wedding day. The position of operations and vendor coordinator had been officially crossed out in red marker and marked as permanently vacant. They had deliberately fired or pushed out their previous coordinator to keep the payroll lean, knowing they had a free, permanent replacement walking down the aisle. They had dug my grave while I was busy picking out floral arrangements and tasting catering menus. Armed with this new information, I spent my evenings transforming my new dining table into a tactical war room. I purchased a thick, heavy-duty binder, a hole punch, and a box of brightly colored indexing tabs. I became a meticulous, obsessive archivist of my own exploitation. I created distinct, fiercely organized sections. The first tab held every single threatening text message Grant had sent, printed clearly with precise timestamps and delivery receipts. The second tab contained the photographs I had taken in the dark office, showing the illegal work schedule and the commercial refinance packet with my name forged onto it. The third tab held the official bank documentation proving their grand $50,000 wedding check was drawn from a restricted, entirely useless account. I added Mallory's message and the old roster photograph as verified witness testimony. I included the security footage Owen had pulled from my parents' front porch, detailing every time a suspicious vehicle had idled near their driveway. Finally, I drafted a comprehensive, chronological timeline starting from the evening Grant proposed, detailing every suspicious financial question he had asked. Leading up to the exact minute I walked out the venue doors, I handed the completed binder over to Vivian the next morning. She flipped through the meticulously labeled sections, a rare smile of genuine respect crossing her sharp features. She did not need to ask for clarifications. The narrative of fraud was laid out perfectly. That very afternoon, Vivian fired the opening volley. She dispatched a formal, aggressive legal demand letter directly to the Mercer family estate and their corporate headquarters via certified mail. The document legally mandated that they immediately halt all forms of harassment, both direct and indirect. Furthermore, It explicitly forbade them from utilizing my name, my social security number, or any of my personal information on any business filings, commercial loan applications, or vendor contracts. The final paragraph of the letter was the most devastating strike. It formally announced my official intent to file for an absolute, at-fault divorce, citing financial deception and irreconcilable breach of trust. During this quiet phase of reconstruction, a fundamental shift occurred deep within my chest. I finally shed the lingering skin of the woman who had stood frozen in that industrial kitchen. I was no longer the shocked, betrayed bride who had a grease-stained rag thrown at her face. I had stepped entirely out of the role of the victim and into the role of the architect. Every action I took, every document I filed, and every boundary I enforced was a deliberate brick laid in the foundation of their impending ruin. I was calmly, quietly setting the battlefield. I was arranging the pieces to ensure that when the Mercers finally fell, they would pay the highest possible price in the only currencies they truly cared about. I was coming for their money. I was coming for their social reputation. And I was going to completely obliterate their false sense of absolute control. When the certified legal demand letter from Vivian Hart landed on the heavy oak dining table of the Mercer estate, the illusion of their control was finally and completely shattered, since they could no longer force me back into their kitchen through sheer physical proximity or direct intimidation. Denise pivoted to the only weapon she believed she still possessed. She began a frantic, desperate campaign of character assassination. Within 48 hours, my phone was flooded with confused text messages from distant aunts, former college roommates, and mutual acquaintances. Denise had spent 2 entire days calling every single contact she could reach. She spun a hysterical, weeping narrative over the telephone, claiming that I was a deceitful, money-hungry fraud. She told anyone who would listen that I had smiled through the expensive ceremony, waited until the final guests departed, and then vanished into the night with the family's extraordinarily generous wedding gift, abandoning her heartbroken son for pure financial gain. The malicious gossip was not enough for them. They needed to find my physical location to re-establish their dominance. On a brisk Thursday afternoon, Grant's younger cousin, Amber Crowley, parked her pristine white sport utility vehicle at the curb in front of my parents' house. She walked up the concrete driveway carrying a woven basket of expensive bakery muffins, playing the role of the concerned, innocent peacemaker. She stood on the front porch, staring directly into the newly installed high-definition doorbell camera lens, and rang the bell. My mother opened the door exactly 2 inches, leaving the heavy brass security chain firmly engaged. "I just want to talk, Mrs. Davis," Amber pleaded, her voice dripping with an artificial, practiced sweetness. "Grant is an absolute wreck. He is barely sleeping. We just want to know Piper is safe and see if we can settle this quiet misunderstanding to save everyone from total humiliation. The family is so worried about her." My mother did not reach for the basket. She looked at Amber with absolute zero tolerance. "Piper is perfectly safe from your family," my mother stated, her voice as cold as ice. "If you, Grant, Denise, or anyone else sharing your last name steps onto this property again, my husband will not be the one answering the door. The county police will be answering it. Have a wonderful afternoon." My mother pushed the solid wood door shut and slid the heavy deadbolt into place with a loud, definitive click. Denied access to my physical space and shut out by my family, Grant took the battle to the digital public square. The following evening, Tessa sent me a direct link to the largest local community group page for the Lexington suburbs. A newly created, anonymous account had posted a sprawling, emotionally manipulative essay. Although the author claimed to be an outraged mutual friend of the groom, the victimizing language and the specific phrasing were undeniably Grant. The post detailed how a prominent, hard-working local family had been utterly scammed by a cold-hearted bride. He wrote that the bride stole a wedding check worth $50,000 and immediately went into hiding, laughing at the destruction she left behind. The comment section of the group exploded almost instantly. Hundreds of local residents, small business owners, and neighborhood gossips chimed in, demanding the runaway bride's name, calling for criminal charges, and offering their deepest sympathies to the poor Mercer family. I sat at my kitchen island and read the sprawling post twice. My pulse remained completely steady. I did not draft a long, emotional defense. I did not engage in a public screaming match in the comment section. Nor did I beg strangers on the internet to understand my pain. I simply opened my laptop, created my own post under my real, legal maiden name, and tagged the community group administrators. I typed a single, surgical paragraph. For anyone genuinely concerned about the financial well-being of the Mercer family following the events of last Saturday, I have attached a few documents for absolute clarity regarding the alleged theft. Below that single sentence, I uploaded 3 high-resolution images. The first was a redacted scan of the official bank notice detailing that the corporate check presented at the wedding could not be honored due to consecutive financial defaults and severe account restrictions. It proved the $50,000 never actually existed. The second image was the staff corkboard photograph, clearly showing my name aggressively slotted into unpaid manual labor shifts weeks before the wedding took place. The final image was the front page of the commercial refinance application, exposing their towering vendor debt and showing my name forged as a household co-applicant without my consent. The effect was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. The local community did not see a petty marital spat. They saw a meticulously documented fraud scheme. Within 20 minutes, the narrative completely flipped. The blind outrage initially directed at the nameless runaway bride immediately redirected onto the Mercer family and their sinking event venue. Then, the former employees arrived to finish the job. Emboldened by my concrete evidence, Mallory Quinn left a scathing comment from her verified profile. She detailed exactly how Denise treated her staff like disposable machinery, bringing up months of delayed paychecks, verbal abuse, and broken promises. 2 other former bartenders chimed in shortly after, anonymously confirming the hostile work environment and the venue's desperate, sinking financial reality. The pristine, untouchable reputation Cedar Ridge Hall had maintained for over 2 decades began burning to the ground in real time, right in front of thousands of local residents. Grant completely panicked. The sudden public humiliation shattered his carefully crafted composure entirely. Later that same night, the motion sensor alert on my parents' porch camera chimed loudly. The live video feed showed Grant standing under the yellow porch light. He was completely alone, his hair disheveled, pacing erratically across the welcome mat. "Please," Grant begged to the closed wooden door, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please just let me talk to her. I can fix this. I can explain the paperwork. I am so sorry for what happened in the kitchen. Just let me see my wife." He waited exactly 45 seconds in absolute silence. When the door remained shut and the house remained dark, his fragile facade violently cracked. The pathetic, weeping husband vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless man who had thrown the dirty rag at my face. He stepped right up to the camera lens, his face twisting into a furious, ugly snarl. "You tell her to take those pictures down right now," Grant hissed, jabbing his finger aggressively at the camera. "Do not blow this out of proportion. She is ruining my entire life. If she does not delete that post and fix this, I swear I will make her regret ever meeting me." He had just handed me the final, necessary nail for his own coffin. I downloaded the high-definition video file immediately and forwarded it directly to Vivian Hart. Vivian did not waste a single minute. The following morning, she formally filed a severe harassment complaint with the county authorities, citing the undeniable video evidence of his escalating, unhinged behavior on my parents' property. She simultaneously fired off a ruthless legal notice to the administrators of the local community group. She demanded they remove all defamatory posts initiated by Grant's alternative accounts, while legally requiring them to preserve the entire metadata history, the IP addresses, and the server logs for our upcoming civil litigation. The Mercer family had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed I was the kind of soft, fragile woman they could drag into the town square and shame into absolute submission. They truly thought the threat of public embarrassment would force me to quietly accept my role in their collapsing empire just to save face. Instead, they discovered the hard way that every single time they opened their mouths to tell a lie, they simply unlocked another door for me to drag the brutal, undeniable truth out into the blinding daylight. The mediation took place on a Tuesday morning inside a private, glass-walled conference room at a neutral boutique hotel in the financial district. Vivian had explicitly instructed opposing counsel that this was to be a strictly controlled preliminary negotiation. The only people permitted in the room were supposed to be me, Vivian, Grant, and his attorney. I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and tailored trousers, holding a steaming cup of green tea. Vivian sat beside me at the polished mahogany table, calmly organizing her pristine stack of manila folders. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy double doors swung open. Grant walked in first, wearing a dark suit that looked entirely too big for him now. He was flanked by an older, balding man carrying a leather briefcase, presumably his legal representation. But they were not alone. Pushing right past the attorney, acting as if they were stepping into their own personal family courtroom, came Denise and Walter. Denise wore a severe, high-neck designer dress, her chin tilted aggressively upward. Walter trailed slightly behind her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking tired and pale. Vivian did not stand up to greet them. She simply laid her silver pen down on her legal pad and raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I believe the invitation for this session was exclusively extended to your client and his legal counsel, Vivian said, directing her icy gaze toward Grant's lawyer. The balding attorney cleared his throat nervously, pulling out a chair. My client felt it was imperative to have his parents present, given the substantial financial investments they made in the wedding and the resulting damages to their family business. Vivian folded her hands together. They can stay. But the moment they disrupt these proceedings, I will terminate this meeting and we will handle this in front of a district judge. Denise scoffed loudly, dropping her expensive handbag onto the table. But she took a seat next to Grant. Walter sat at the far end, refusing to make eye contact with me. The opposing attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He adopted a tone of weary condescension, the kind used to scold a misbehaving child. Let us get straight to the point. My clients have suffered immense reputational and financial damage due to your client abandoning her marital obligations on the very first night. We are willing to forego a public, drawn-out at-fault divorce filing if she agrees to our initial terms. He slid the paper to the center of the table. We are demanding the immediate return of 100% of the cash gifts given by the wedding guests. Furthermore, we require her to assume 50% of the total wedding expenses, which amounts to roughly $45,000. In exchange, my client will agree to an uncontested dissolution of the marriage. I did not touch the paper. I simply looked at Grant. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to play the role of the deeply wounded partner. I just do not understand why you had to take it to this extreme, Piper, Grant said, his voice dripping with practiced sorrow. It was just a stupid kitchen towel. I had a few drinks at the reception. It was a poorly timed joke that went too far. And that schedule in the office, that was just written for fun. An aspirational draft just in case you wanted to eventually join the family business. You overreacted and destroyed my family for absolutely no reason. He looked around the room, seeking validation from his mother, who nodded vigorously in agreement. They genuinely believed their own fabricated reality. They thought they could simply reframe the narrative and talk their way out of a corner. Vivian did not argue with his emotional plea. She simply reached into her sleek briefcase and pulled out her own stack of documents. Let us discuss those aspirational business plans, Vivian said smoothly. She slid the first piece of paper across the table. It was the official banking notice. This is the corporate check your parents presented at the reception, as you can see by the glaring red stamps from the financial institution. The account it was drawn from was severely restricted due to consecutive financial defaults. It was a fraudulent piece of paper presented for social clout. Denise opened her mouth to speak, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson, but Vivian was already sliding the second document forward. "This is the time-stamped photograph of the commercial refinance application," Vivian continued, her voice razor-sharp and unrelenting. "It clearly shows my client assigned as a household co-applicant, an action she never consented to. And this third document is the official alert from her credit monitoring bureau, showing an unauthorized soft inquiry from your exact commercial lender at 8 o'clock on the night of the wedding." The balding attorney stopped taking notes. He stared at the credit inquiry document, his professional demeanor instantly fracturing. He clearly had not been informed about the forged loan applications. He shot a frantic, angry look at Grant. Vivian was not finished. She placed the photograph of the corkboard schedule face up in front of Grant. "And this is the aspirational schedule you mentioned. A highly detailed operational roster complete with vendor delivery times and operational duties. Created 6 weeks before the ceremony took place." Denise slammed her hand flat against the mahogany wood. "She is my daughter-in-law. She is family. Family helps run the business. We were simply giving her a role of equal partnership." I finally broke my silence. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and locked my eyes directly onto Denise. "If it was a co-ownership role?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, and utterly lethal. Why was I explicitly scheduled for a 5 a.m. linen count and a midnight buffet tray, scrubbing shift without a single dollar of salary attached to my name? Denise's mouth snapped shut. She stared at me, completely stunned by the direct, unblinking confrontation. She had expected me to yell or cry. My cold, analytical detachment paralyzed her. Grant slammed his fist on the table, leaning aggressively toward me. "You are twisting everything. You cannot prove any of this malicious intent. It is your word against ours, and you are just a bitter woman trying to steal our money." "Actually," Vivian interrupted, pressing a button on her tablet, "we have more than just her word." When I had stood in that dark manager's office on my wedding night, my phone already illuminated to capture the forged loan documents. I had pressed the record button on my voice memo application the exact second I heard Grant's heavy footsteps on the loading dock. I had captured the entire conversation with his cousin through the open door. The crystal-clear audio filled the tense silence of the conference room. Grant's metallic, arrogant laugh echoed from the tablet speakers. Then came his own voice, undeniable and cruel. "She is compliant. Besides, marrying a wife with a brain is significantly cheaper than hiring another operations manager and a certified accountant. We need her credit score and her organizational skills. Once her name is on the loan, she is locked in. She will do what she is told." The recording stopped. The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. Grant's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. The opposing attorney aggressively shoved the settlement paper back into his briefcase and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew instantly that his clients were completely indefensible. If this went before a judge, the Mercer family would face catastrophic legal and financial ruin. Walter let out a long, ragged breath. He slumped back in his chair, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. He understood the profound danger they were in. The unauthorized use of my Social Security number and the fraudulent credit pull were not just grounds for divorce, they were grounds for severe federal penalties. There has clearly been a massive post-marital misunderstanding, their lawyer stammered, frantically attempting to pivot his strategy. "Perhaps we can strike the previous financial demands and discuss a mutual walkaway." I did not let Vivian answer for me. I looked directly at the opposing counsel. "Here is my offer," I said clearly. "We execute a rapid, uncontested divorce immediately. You withdraw every single baseless financial claim regarding the wedding costs and the gifts. You provide a legally binding written confirmation that my name, my Social Security number, and all of my personal data have been completely expunged from every single business and financial file your clients possess. And your clients will never contact me, my family, or my employer ever again." I leaned back in my chair. "If you refuse, We file the massive harassment and fraud countersuits tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. It was a perfectly clean exit. It was the only logical escape route they had left. Walter actually reached for the pen, desperate to end the nightmare. But Denise could not handle the humiliation. Her massive ego could not process the reality of being completely cornered by the woman she had intended to enslave. Her pride overrode her basic survival instincts. "Do not sign a single thing, Walter," Denise hissed, her voice shaking with venomous pride. She grabbed her designer handbag and stood up violently, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "She is bluffing. She does not have the stamina for a real court battle. We are the Mercer family. We do not surrender to manipulative little girls." She grabbed Grant by the arm, physically hauling her grown son out of his chair. Grant looked completely lost, paralyzed between his mother's delusion and the terrifying reality on the table. But he followed her. He always followed her. Walter hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring at the damning evidence on the table, before heavily following his wife and son out of the room. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them. They walked out of sheer, arrogant pride, entirely unaware that they had just burned their final bridge. They had turned down my only offer of mercy, transforming a simple mediation into the definitive turning point that would guarantee their total destruction. I threw myself entirely into my new role at Harbor and Slate Studio. The sharp, fast-paced environment of the creative agency was exactly the distraction my mind required to process the chaos of the previous weeks. I arrived at my desk at 8 in the morning and rarely left before 6 in the evening. My intense focus did not go unnoticed by the senior leadership. Within my first 2 weeks on the floor, my supervisor, Celia Rowe, pulled me into her glass-paneled office. She handed me the lead coordinator position for a major upcoming commercial launch, a highly sensitive project usually reserved for veteran staff members. "You operate with a rare kind of surgical precision," Celia told me, handing over a thick binder of client briefs. "I need someone managing this account who does not panic when things go sideways. You have a very steady hand. Piper." That was the exact moment I realized the Mercers had profoundly underestimated the very skills they tried to steal for themselves. When my first substantial paycheck hit my bank account, it solidified a concrete wall between my past and my present. The Mercer family had built their entire intimidation strategy on the arrogant assumption that I would eventually panic, run out of funds, and come crawling back to their doorstep, begging for the financial security of my marriage. They were completely wrong. I had my own secure apartment, my own steady income, and my own structured life. I did not need a single dime from their failing empire. While I was building my new foundation, Vivian was systematically tightening the legal noose around their operation. She drafted a formal, aggressive notice of dispute and sent it directly to the compliance department of the commercial lending institution. This was the exact bank that had executed the unauthorized soft credit inquiry on my profile on the night of the wedding. The legal letter demanded absolute, written confirmation that the bank possessed no signed consent forms or loan applications bearing my signature. Vivian made it explicitly clear that failing to produce such documents, or attempting to process the pending refinance using my stolen credentials, would result in immediate federal reporting for identity fraud. We were actively cutting off their oxygen supply at the source. The defensive perimeter I had established quickly transformed into an offensive staging ground, thanks to the continued quiet rebellion of the Cedar Ridge Hall staff. A former administrative assistant named Renee Foster managed to locate my private email address. She had resigned 3 months prior to the ceremony, but before leaving, she had forwarded several toxic internal communications to her personal account to protect herself from Denise and her frequent blame games. Renee sent me a forwarded email chain dated exactly 5 weeks before my wedding. In the thread, Denise explicitly instructed the accounting department to cancel the upcoming interviews for a new bookkeeper. The message read, "Do not bother hiring anyone else for the office after the wedding. The girl will handle the books and the vendors. It will save us an extra salary we desperately need to keep the doors open." The very next evening, Mallory delivered the ultimate, devastating strike. She sent an encrypted digital file to my phone with a brief, urgent note attached. It was a copy of the security camera footage from the service hallway directly outside the catering kitchen. The timestamp matched my wedding night perfectly. The camera angle was slightly skewed, positioned high in the corner near the ceiling tiles. But the visual was undeniably clear. The silent, grainy video showed me walking into the harsh fluorescent light in my wedding gown. It showed Grant storming through the back door, his sleeves rolled up. It captured the exact violent moment his arm whipped forward, hurling the greasy bar rag directly into my face, most damning of all. The camera captured Denise standing in the background. She had her arms casually crossed over her chest, watching the entire humiliating spectacle with an approving, calculated smirk. I sat in Vivian's office the next morning and played the video on her large desktop monitor. She leaned back in her leather chair, steepling her fingers together, her eyes locking onto the screen. "This right here," Vivian said, tapping the edge of the monitor with her silver pen, "is heavy artillery. We do not fire this weapon into the dark. We keep this securely in the vault until the exact moment they try to convince a judge that you were the hysterical aggressor and they were the innocent victims. We let them build their arrogant house of lies, and then we use this footage to burn it straight to the ground." Hearing her validate the evidence solidified my complete transformation. I finally understood that my true strength did not lie in dramatic tears or loud, emotional confrontations in public. My absolute power came from remaining 3 steps ahead of their greed. I was surviving and winning by meticulously recording every interaction, continuously backing up my digital evidence, legally verifying their financial decay, and weaponizing their own mistreated former employees as credible witnesses against them. Grant, meanwhile, was slowly unraveling as his access to me remained entirely severed because I had blocked his primary phone number. He resorted to calling me from various unknown, prepaid cellular phones. I never answered a single call, but I let every one of them route directly to my secure voicemail inbox. His tactics swung wildly from day to day. Sometimes, his recorded voice was thick with fake, heavy sorrow, whispering pathetic apologies into the receiver and begging for a second chance. Other times, he shifted the blame entirely onto his mother, claiming Denise had heavily pressured him into the financial scheme and that he had only acted out of a misguided sense of family loyalty. In his most desperate messages, he promised that if I just came back to him, we could move out, rent our own place on the other side of town, and separate ourselves from the event venue entirely. But every time I listened to those voicemails, sitting alone in the quiet safety of my apartment, I noticed a terrifying, undeniable pattern. Each frantic negotiation proved that Grant was terrified of losing something, but he was absolutely not terrified of losing me. He never once mentioned missing the sound of my laugh. He never recalled my favorite meal or the music we used to listen to on weekend drives. He never acknowledged the massive career sacrifices I had made to relocate to his city for the wedding. Instead, his panicked ramblings were entirely transactional and administrative. He did not know my soul, but he knew the exact name of the commercial bank holding their massive debt. He knew the precise, looming deadline for the refinance application down to the hour. He knew the exact schedule of their vendor deficits, and he knew the precise dollar amount required to save Cedar Ridge Hall from total foreclosure. That stark realization was the final, defining clarity I needed to finish the war. It extinguished the very last drop of pity or lingering doubt I held in my heart. The charming man I thought I loved had never actually existed, and the frantic stranger begging on my voicemail was merely mourning the loss of his most valuable, unpaid asset. I was ready to close the trap, realizing that their campaign of public smearing had only ignited their own reputation. Grant abruptly shifted his strategy. The aggressive demands and public accusations ceased, replaced entirely by a pathetic, desperate barrage of romantic gestures. He pivoted to a soft, tactical approach, hoping to manipulate the lingering emotional ties he assumed I still possessed. Enormous bouquets of expensive white roses began arriving at my parents' front porch. Thick, handwritten letters were shoved into their brass mailbox on a daily basis. I refused to open the envelopes with my bare hands, treating them instead like contaminated evidence. I read one letter through a clear plastic storage bag while standing in my kitchen. The ink was messy and frantic. "I had way too much to drink at the reception," Grant wrote, his words practically begging for sympathy. My mother was in my ear all night, stressing me out about the catering bills and the venue's overhead costs. I cracked under the pressure. The man in that kitchen was not the real me. Piper. "Please, just let me see you so I can make this right." I did not reply. I filed the letters directly into my heavy binder. The situation, however, escalated from pathetic to genuinely alarming on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a late strategy meeting at Harbor and Slate Studio. It was shortly past 6 in the evening when I took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The concrete space was cold, damp, and mostly deserted. As I approached my vehicle, a figure stepped out from behind a thick concrete pillar. It was Grant. He looked entirely unhinged. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and prominent dark circles shadowed his eyes under the flickering fluorescent garage lights. He had clearly been waiting in the damp cold for hours. "Piper, please wait," Grant pleaded, stepping directly into my path before I could reach for the driver's side door handle. My pulse spiked, a sudden rush of adrenaline flooding my system. But I kept my posture rigid and my voice completely flat. "Step away from my car. Grant, you are not supposed to be here." He refused to move. He reached out and grabbed the metal handle of my car door, physically blocking my only exit. He launched into a frantic, breathless monologue about how much he needed me, how his family was falling apart, and how we could fix everything if I would just listen to his voice. Before I had to decide whether to scream or physically push past him, a heavy beam of light cut through the dim garage. Two uniformed building security guards, having monitored the live surveillance feed from the lobby desk, jogged rapidly toward us. They unclipped their radios and ordered Grant to step back from my vehicle immediately. Grant raised his hands in a panic, stammering excuses as the guards firmly escorted him toward the exit ramp. They stood by my car while I safely got inside, and they immediately filed a formal incident report regarding the trespass. Before driving away, I requested a digital copy of the security footage for my personal records, without even having to hire a private investigator or lift a finger. Grant had just handed me a pristine, undeniable piece of video evidence documenting his stalking and physical intimidation. Later that exact same evening, my phone rang. The caller identification showed my mother's cell phone. When I answered, she sounded utterly exhausted. Denise had called her private home line just an hour earlier. The haughty, commanding matriarch of the Mercer family had completely vanished, replaced by a weeping, frantic woman. Denise had dropped the grand facade of the wealthy socialite and essentially begged my mother for mercy. "She said they are completely out of time," my mother relayed to me, her voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. She confessed that the event hall is on the absolute edge of bankruptcy because of a massive commercial loan coming due in a matter of days. Denise was sobbing. "She said they just need your help with one single signature, and then everything will blow over and go back to normal." Sitting on my living room sofa, staring at the blank television screen, the entire, terrifying puzzle finally snapped together in my mind with absolute clarity. The Mercers did not orchestrate this marriage simply because Denise wanted a free maid to scrub the banquet trays. The unpaid physical labor was just a convenient, cruel bonus. The real prize, the absolute core of their entire marital scheme, was my pristine credit score. They needed the legal binding of marriage to fraudulently drag my name onto the final life preserver for a sinking corporate ship. They were drowning in debt, and they had specifically chosen me to be their financial human shield. The very next morning, Vivian called me into her office to review a formal settlement offer sent over by Grant's legal counsel. Knowing their backs were pressed firmly against the wall, they attempted one last, deeply insulting maneuver. The legal document stated that Grant would agree to a rapid, uncontested divorce, but it came with heavy, non-negotiable conditions. I was required to sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement stating that absolutely no abusive or coercive behavior occurred on our wedding night. Furthermore, I was required to immediately delete every single piece of photographic evidence I had posted on the community forums, refuting their theft allegations. They wanted to buy their reputation back with a piece of paper. Vivian left the room to get us fresh coffee, leaving me alone with my phone. I saw a new blocked voicemail notification and clicked play. It was Grant's voice. He was thick with tears, begging me to just sign the paper so we could both move on peacefully and save his family from the public shame. For a brief, agonizing moment, the sheer weight of the psychological warfare pressed down heavily on my chest. I felt a sharp, sudden stab of pain. It was not because I still loved him. The romantic love had died permanently the moment that greasy rag hit my face. The pain came from the devastating, profound realization that the man I had trusted enough to stand beside at an altar was capable of falling to his knees, weeping in agony, and lying through his teeth all in the exact same breath. It was a deep grief for the illusion I had briefly lived inside. I took a slow, deep breath, burying the grief entirely. I deleted the voicemail. When Vivian returned, I slid the settlement offer back across her desk. I instructed her to send our final, non-negotiable response. There was only one single path forward. The Mercer family had to publicly retract every single accusation of theft. They had to drop all financial claims regarding the wedding expenses. They had to completely erase my personal data from all of their business files. And they had to accept an unconditional divorce with absolutely no gag orders attached. Less than 2 hours later, Vivian received their reply. The Mercers categorically refused the terms. They rejected the only clean lifeline I offered them. They did not refuse because they possessed some secret, powerful legal leverage. They refused because they were fundamentally trapped in their own toxic, historical cycle. For decades, they had successfully bullied vendors, manipulated their employees, and intimidated their way out of consequences. They were completely accustomed to people eventually yielding to the sheer volume of their noise, the manipulation of their tears, and the relentless weight of their pressure. They truly believed that my firm boundary was just another temporary negotiation tactic that they could simply wear down over time. It was a fatal, arrogant miscalculation, and it was the exact mistake that would guarantee their total and absolute ruin at the final hour. The retaliation for my refusal came swiftly and viciously. Late Tuesday evening, my phone began vibrating with a rapid succession of frantic alerts. An anonymous user had posted my previous residential address, the exact make of my vehicle, and my license plate number on a highly trafficked local community forum. The post painted me as a manipulative fugitive hiding from justice after stealing tens of thousands of dollars from a beloved local family. Even though I had already vacated that apartment, the sheer malice of broadcasting my personal location signaled a dangerous, unpredictable escalation. I did not panic. I simply picked up the phone and called my inner circle. Within 45 minutes, my brother's heavy work truck was idling aggressively outside the secure gates of my new building. Owen and Tessa did not take a single chance. We packed a small suitcase in complete silence. I spent the next 3 nights sleeping in a secluded, heavily wooded rental cabin that Owen secured under his corporate contracting account, ensuring my name was nowhere on the ledger. While I was packing, Vivian forwarded the digital forum post directly to the county police department, officially adding severe cyber harassment and malicious doxing to the rapidly expanding criminal complaint against Grant and his mother. Meanwhile, the digital stage Denise had so carefully constructed began to collapse spectacularly under its own weight. The administrators of the Lexington community groups grew suspicious of the sudden, aggressive influx of newly created accounts fiercely defending the Mercer family and attacking anyone who questioned their narrative. After a brief technical investigation, the group moderators discovered that over a dozen distinct profiles were operating from the exact same Internet Protocol address cluster. They traced the digital footprint directly back to the primary wireless router sitting inside the administrative office of Cedar Ridge Hall. The administrators published their findings and issued an immediate, permanent ban on every single account associated with the venue and the family. Denise was suddenly and completely silenced. She was stripped of the digital megaphone she had relied upon for decades to manipulate the local social narrative. Simultaneously, a massive local bridal forum erupted into total chaos. The initial crack in the venue's pristine facade opened a devastating floodgate. Dozens of former clients, no longer afraid of Denise and her threats, began sharing their own nightmare experiences in highly detailed posts. Brides uploaded screenshots of desperate email chains begging for the return of their security deposits months after their events had concluded. Others described horrifying scenarios where Denise would force wildly expensive, last-minute catering package changes just days before the ceremony. She would routinely threaten to cancel the entire event and lock the doors if the desperate couples did not immediately comply and wire additional funds. Anyone who dared to question the inflated, confusing invoices was subjected to her signature arrogant, condescending wrath. The prestigious, untouchable legacy of Cedar Ridge Hall was being eviscerated in real time, exposed to the entire county as nothing more than a predatory cash grab built on intimidation. The compounding weight of the public humiliation and the impending financial apocalypse finally shattered the Mercer family from the inside out. I learned later from a mutual legal acquaintance that the atmosphere inside the Grand Mercer estate had turned violently toxic. Walter, who had spent decades quietly standing in the background enabling his wife's cruelty, finally hit his absolute breaking point. The looming, very real threat of federal fraud charges and the absolute destruction of his retirement assets pushed him over the edge. He reportedly cornered Denise and Grant in their lavish living room, screaming that their unchecked arrogance and ridiculous theatrical cruelty in the catering kitchen had doomed them all. Walter realized the bitter, agonizing truth. If Grant had simply played the role of a loving, supportive husband for just 6 more months, they might have easily secured the commercial loan using my spotless credit. Their fundamental inability to mask their disdain, their desperate need to establish immediate dominance, had cost them absolutely everything. Then came the ultimate, defining twist of the entire war. On Thursday morning, Vivian's direct private office line rang. It was Walter. He was calling from an untraceable prepaid cellular phone, his voice hushed, frantic, and completely stripped of his usual wealthy patriarch bravado. He requested absolute confidentiality and offered a devastating trade. Walter stated he was fully willing to sign a sworn, notarized legal affidavit explicitly confirming that I was never once consulted, informed, or asked for permission regarding the commercial refinance packet. He admitted, on a recorded line, that Grant and Denise had forged my information onto the household co-applicants section in a desperate bid to save the sinking property. In exchange for this explosive, undeniably damning testimony, Walter pleaded with Vivian to carve his name entirely out of the impending civil lawsuits and federal identity fraud reports. Vivian, acting with cold, terrifying efficiency, drafted the strict immunity agreement and secured his legally binding signature within 2 hours. This was the fatal stab directly to the heart of their crumbling defense. It was no longer simply my word against the wealthy Mercer family. It was not just the testimony of disgruntled former bartenders or my protective friends. The patriarch of the Mercer family had just formally confessed to the entire financial conspiracy in order to save his own skin, throwing his wife and his son directly under the advancing bus. Armed with Walter's sworn affidavit, the forged documents, and the kitchen security footage, Vivian did not hesitate for a single second. She immediately contacted Grant's legal counsel and scheduled one final, mandatory working session for Friday morning. She made the stakes entirely clear to the opposing attorney. If they did not accept our unconditional terms and sign the absolute divorce decree at this exact meeting, she would walk straight from the hotel conference room to the county courthouse. She promised to officially file the comprehensive countersuit for fraud, identity theft, harassment, and severe defamation before the lunch hour. There would be no more extensions. There would be no more mediations. The clock had completely run out. The night before the decisive meeting, I sat alone by the large bay window in the quiet rental cabin, watching the cold wind rustle through the dark pine trees. My phone screen lit up brightly on the wooden coffee table, despite the strict legal warnings and the multiple carrier blocks. Grant had managed to bypass the system by using yet another randomly generated internet number. The text message contained a single, chilling sentence. "Just smile and nod one more time, and everything will go back to how it was." I stared at the glowing black words on the bright screen. Exactly 1 month ago, standing in that filthy, grease-stained kitchen in a ruined wedding dress. A message like that would have made my blood run entirely cold. It was a command heavily disguised as a romantic plea. It was a desperate, final attempt to shove me back into the obedient, silent little box they had built for me before the wedding. But as I read those words now, sitting in the safety of my own sanctuary, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. I did not reply. I took a clear screenshot of the message. I uploaded the image into the final section of my encrypted digital evidence folder, filing it right next to the rejected bank checks, the hostile schedules, and the video of the thrown rag. I turned the power off on the phone entirely and placed it inside my leather tote bag. I switched off the small bedside lamp and pulled the heavy cotton blankets up to my chin. I closed my eyes and drifted off to a deep, uninterrupted sleep. A strange, profound calmness washing over my entire body, because this time, I knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that when the sun came up tomorrow morning, the person forced to their knees and begging for mercy would absolutely not be me. The final meeting took place inside a stark, unadorned conference room at the county courthouse on a Friday morning. The room smelled of old paper and floor wax. It was a far cry from the luxurious, catered hotel suite they had demanded for our first mediation attempt. The atmosphere was incredibly heavy. Grant looked absolutely haggard. His expensive designer suit hung loosely on his shoulders. His posture was slumped, and his eyes were deeply bloodshot from consecutive sleepless nights. Denise sat next to him, radiating a bitter, defensive energy. She kept her jaw clamped shut, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Walter sat entirely motionless at the far end of the long wooden table. He stared blankly at the yellow legal pad in front of him, looking exactly like a man who had already watched the final chapter of his family legacy burn to ash. Vivian did not waste a single second with polite introductions or pleasantries. She opened her sleek leather briefcase and systematically placed 3 devastating pieces of evidence directly onto the center of the polished table. "First," Vivian announced, her voice echoing sharply off the bare walls, "we have the certified banking records proving that the extravagant wedding check your clients presented was drawn from a defaulted, restricted corporate account. Second, we have high-definition security footage recovered from the catering hallway. This video clearly captures your client physically assaulting my client with a soiled rag on the night of the wedding while his mother watches approvingly." Grant flinched violently as if he had been physically struck. His attorney opened his mouth to voice an objection, but Vivian immediately cut him off, sliding the third and final document forward. "And finally," Vivian said, her tone dropping to a lethal whisper, "we have a sworn, notarized legal affidavit from Walter Mercer. In this document, he explicitly confirms that Piper Davis never consented to being listed as a household co-applicant on any commercial refinance documentation. He confirms her signature was forged by his son and his wife." The opposing attorney froze completely. He stared at Walter's undeniable signature on the paper, his professional composure crumbling into pure, visible panic. He looked at Grant, then at Denise, realizing they had lied to him about the extent of their fraud. Desperate to salvage the crumbling situation and protect his own legal standing, he attempted a frantic pivot. "These are incredibly serious allegations, Counselor," the flustered attorney stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "But surely we can look at this as a complex family dispute." Marriages are highly stressful events, and administrative errors frequently happen when merging households and family businesses. It was a weak, pathetic attempt to reframe criminal fraud and physical intimidation as a simple marital misunderstanding. But before Vivian could even begin to systematically dismantle his ridiculous argument, Denise ruined it entirely on her own. Her massive, fragile ego simply could not tolerate being cornered or painted as a criminal in a room full of lawyers. "It is not an administrative error," Denise snapped, slamming her manicured hand hard against the wooden table. "A woman who marries into a respectable family must know how to bear the burden of her husband's household. We were simply putting her to work where she belonged to earn her keep." The silence that followed her outburst was absolutely deafening. The opposing attorney groaned audibly and buried his face in his hands. Denise had just verbally confessed to their exploitative intent right in front of two officers of the court, instantly obliterating any remaining defensive strategy they possessed. Faced with the immediate, undeniable threat of the case expanding into severe federal identity theft charges, unauthorized use of personal information, and criminal harassment, the Mercer legal counsel aggressively advised his clients to surrender completely. They had absolutely no leverage left to negotiate, one by one. They were forced to concede to every single demand Vivian placed in front of them. They agreed to sign an immediate unconditional divorce decree. They legally withdrew every single baseless financial claim regarding the wedding expenses and the guest gifts. They signed a binding legal agreement to issue a public retraction of their defamatory statements on the community forums. They authorized the complete, verifiable erasure of my personal data from all of their corporate and financial records. Finally, they agreed to cover a substantial portion of my legal representation fees. I did not scream at them in triumph. I did not pound my fists on the table or demand a dramatic, tearful apology. I won the entire war by simply sitting quietly, my hands folded in my lap, and watching them ink their signatures onto the ugly truth they had tried so desperately to bury on our wedding night. As we finally exited the conference room, the heavy wooden door swinging shut behind us, Denise lunged forward into the courthouse hallway. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. She could not handle the reality of her defeat. "You completely destroyed my family," Denise hissed, her voice echoing loudly down the marble corridor. "I hope you are satisfied with the mess you have made." I stopped walking. I turned around and looked her directly in the eye. I felt absolutely no anger, no sorrow, and no pity. I only felt a cold, absolute detachment. "Your family destroyed itself," I replied, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "The destruction began the exact moment you looked at a bride and saw nothing but a piece of free labor." I turned my back on her and walked confidently toward the main exit. I pushed through the heavy brass and glass doors and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the courthouse steps. The warm air felt incredible against my skin. Suddenly, Grant hurried out right behind me. He physically stepped in front of my path to block my way down the stairs. He looked utterly broken, entirely stripped of all the arrogant charm and fake confidence he had used to trap me months ago. "Tell me one thing," Grant asked, his voice hoarse and trembling with unshed tears. "Did you ever actually love me even for a single second?" I looked at the pathetic man I had almost tethered my entire existence to. "I loved the man you pretended to be," I answered honestly, maintaining direct eye contact. "I never loved the person standing in front of me today." Tears spilled over his eyelashes. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my arm, too terrified of the legal consequences to actually touch me. "Please, Piper," he begged, his voice cracking. "Do not release the hallway video to the public. Do not post my father's affidavit online. Just let us walk away from this in peace. Please." He was openly begging for mercy on the steps of a public building. He was asking for the exact same grace and silence he had so violently denied me in that greasy catering kitchen. I remembered the text message he had sent me the night before, arrogantly commanding me to just smile and nod to make everything go back to normal. I looked at his desperate, tear-stained face I did not yell. I did not curse at him. I gave him exactly what he had asked for. I smiled a calm, perfectly serene smile, and I gave him one single, definitive nod. But this time, he understood exactly what the gesture meant. It did not mean submission. It did not mean I was going to protect his secrets. It meant that I was completely finished with him, and he no longer held a single drop of power over my life or my choices. I stepped gracefully around him and walked down the wide concrete steps. At the bottom of the staircase, my entire world was waiting for me. Tessa was leaning against the hood of her car, grinning broadly. Owen stood tall next to my parents, my father giving me a quiet, incredibly proud salute. In the distance, faintly echoing from the top of the stairs behind me, I could hear Grant's cellular phone begin to vibrate and chime relentlessly. The notifications were flooding in from angry vendors, panicked bank managers, and a local community that had finally realized the truth. The Mercer family had not just lost a bride. They had permanently lost the very last mask hiding their bankrupt reality. I walked directly into the warm, safe embrace of my family. I stepped firmly into my new life, armed with my absolute freedom, my thriving career, my intact dignity, and a beautiful victory that belonged entirely to me at the very end of the story. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and support me by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.